I think we made a lot of mistakes as first-time founders. A lot of the feedback we received early on was, I'd love to see a year's worth of data. I think people had a lot of questions about how we would handle some of the operational and logistical components of it. My kind of tied with getting out there and talking to customers is focusing on building. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time going to different events or trying to find different networking opportunities to get in front of investors, and they just want to talk about the business a lot rather than build the business. We just basically kept our heads down and worked hard to make every customer as happy as possible, and what it led to was just some really incredible retention and engagement metrics that got a lot of investors pretty excited.
Brian, welcome to Tech Scenes Unplugged.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. I always like starting from the top, so let's start from the top. Tell me about Pickle.
Of course, yeah. So Pickle, it's a rental marketplace, kind of like an Airbnb, but for things that you own. So we've started with women's clothing and accessories. We'll eventually expand into men's and then all other categories from there. And basically, it's pretty simple. People just upload items from their closet, typically things that they've recently purchased. So it's a trendier set of products. And then other people are able to make an offer to rent them for a few days, whether it's for weddings, a vacation, just a night out with friends. It's all made possible through very convenient delivery options. So our most popular is door-to-door courier delivery. So a lot of it's kind of like DoorDash, but for clothes. And that's also kind of why it's called Pickle. If you're in an outfit pickle and you need something at the last minute, you can get something delivered or pick something up from a neighbor just in time for whatever you need it for.
That's so cool. What are like the most common like items people tend to put up or borrow? Borrow, rent? Like what do you call that?
Kind of interchangeable. We call it rent typically, but borrow also works. Yeah, I mean it's a lot of dresses, just different sets, outfits, some accessories. We've started to see things outside of clothes already, such as high definition cameras and suitcases, luggage. I think people have done some skis or snowboards, but mostly in the women's clothing and accessories lens right now. Yeah, like I was mentioning, the most common use cases are things like weddings, hanging out with friends on the weekend,
Right.
going to an event, going on vacation. But we also do a lot of things for ski gear, in January, February, March timeframe. A lot of things around the holidays are pretty popular. Halloween's a big time as well, and then all the concerts and festivals and things like that. So a wide range of use cases is what we found.
So building a marketplace is not easy. Are you guys rolling this out city by city, or what's the kind of strategy of like rollout and logistics of something like this?
Yeah, so we have a pretty interesting marketplace because the marketplace dynamics definitely work a bit better when things are happening locally. But that said, it's not restricted to just being local. So we have three different delivery methods. One is the courier delivery. The second is we call it handoff, so you're just meeting up in person to exchange items. And then the last is shipping. So we obviously launched in New York. We launched the Rent a Marketplace back in May of 2022. And a lot of the supply was kind of initially in New York. Then we saw a lot of demand started to pick up in Los Angeles. So people in Los Angeles were shipping items in from closets in New York. And then people in Los Angeles started to realize, hey, I just paid, $50, $60 for this rental. I could just upload my own things and make that on the other side. So then supply starts to build in a market. And then when people from that market come on to search for items, they find stuff that's actually near them that instead of having to wait 2 to 3 days to ship it in, they can just get it same day, oftentimes within an hour or two, and so on and so forth. So we definitely focus on building locally, but the national approach is kind of how we expand into these new markets and how they they grow initially. So it's a little different from an Uber, where if there was, if Uber wasn't live in a market, there's no supply. Well, even if we
Right.
have no supply in a market, our demand can still be activated through other markets. So it's a bit easier to get off the ground. And excited to be expanding to a bunch of different markets this year.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And it's interesting. Most high growth companies, startup companies pivot. I think the stats 1.8 times. Well, it's hard to pivot 1.8 times as a single company, but nearly 2 times. And oftentimes I've had so many conversations and I have so many clients that have done this is they started somewhere that didn't end up going where they wanted to go. But by doing that, they collected data that nobody else had to actually see a marketplace. And I think you guys are an example of that, right? You guys started off doing something different than you are today. Is that right?
Totally, yeah. So when we initially launched back in the spring of 2021, we were a social polling platform. So the whole idea was to help people make better purchase decisions by allowing them to post a few options in the form of a poll to a community of users with similar style preferences. So if you're looking for a new suit, some shoes, a dress, whatever it is, we were hoping to introduce social proof into the purchasing process, and then all the while crowdsourcing opinions on these different options. What we noticed is that in the comments of those polls, people were recommending stuff that they already owned, and that's what kind of eventually set off the light bulb of, what if we just let people rent, lend, and borrow to and from each other? It's funny because a lot of the, not a lot, but definitely some of the concepts from the social polling platform has started to come back into, what Pickle is today in terms of
Mm,
some of the social features. A lot of, I think, our investors would say we have some of the engagement of a social app with the monetization of a marketplace. Community and the social element of Pickle definitely drives a lot of our engagement, retention, trust, safety, and community aspect in general. And I think there's a few things that we have coming down the pipe that will play from some of the old social polling concepts even more.
that's really interesting. And what, you guys, if I remember right, bootstrapped for a couple years, right?
We
What
did.
did
So we
what
we
did that
we
look
didn't.
like?
It was glim. Yeah. So Julia and I, Julia's my co-founder. We met working at Blackstone together. I guess about 7 years ago now, and or maybe 6.5. I'm not sure, but so we left in the spring of 2021, and we didn't end up raising any institutional capital until the summer of 2023. So we went about 2.5 years. We raised some capital from friends and family, but we didn't take a salary from that. We were just investing that all in the business. It was, I think, like 200,000 from friends and family that stretched us 2.5 years. So we operated extremely lean, and during it, you're like, I just can't wait, to bring in some capital, be able to hire a team, and really start to scale this thing. I think
Right.
to this day, the roots in our DNA of needing to operate very efficiently, not being able to afford giving rental credits or incentives out, by and large, not being able to afford paying influencers or paying for paid ads for promotion, things like that, taught us how to do all of it in a much more organic way,
Right.
but also a bit of a scrappier way. So things that we still do to this day, that came out of kind of necessity, I would say.
And you took a lot of subway rides. Is that correct?
That's true. Yeah. So part of that was we were not able to pay any couriers to do this
Right.
door-to-door courier delivery, which was one of the it's one of the more popular things about the platform. It's something that people talk about a lot, and it's I think a reason that we're able to connect all of these people and all these flows, and kind of make Pickle what Pickle is. So Julia and I did all the deliveries ourselves for the first 7 or 8 months, which included taking about 4,000 subway rides. And it was a great experience for a couple of reasons. One, we got to talk to every single customer that used the platform for the first 7 or 8 months. So the first couple thousand customers, first couple thousand transactions. And at the time, I was still doing all of the engineering. Julie was doing a lot of the product design work. So we would go out delivering items from like 7 a.m. till 9 p.m. And then we'd go home and hop on Zoom together. And basically just live code whatever feedback we got that day. So the feedback cycles were extremely fast. They were from customer's mouth, to keyboard and released that night, and then we would just do that again the next day. And we did that basically 7 days a week for several months. And I think that's part of what allowed us to move so quickly at the beginning and really create something that people really loved. I mean, what's better than telling someone something and then seeing it implemented the next day when you go to use
Right.
the app. So it gets people pretty excited.
If I could, I would just pause here and just sit on that thought for the longest time, because I think a lot of founders don't have the opportunity, or not putting themselves in the opportunity to like really get live feedback. I mean, you're literally going door to door getting this feedback. I think that's such a cool story. And I know a lot of people are like, that's not glamorous, but I mean, this isn't glamorous. Like, I think the companies that are built on such strong foundations like that are the ones that succeed. And like, you guys have definitely grown since that time. But like you said, it's like, it sounds like it's still part of your DNA.
Definitely still part of the DNA. We usually say that when people come on board, we have like the, do a delivery as one of the onboarding pieces, and we try and get people out there. And the whole point, yeah, is just talking to customers. It's definitely not something we necessarily like chose to do. It's
Right.
very hard to get in front of customers. And if you had asked me a couple years ago, would you rather do this, or in terms of go around on the subway and talk to all the customers for 7 or 8 months, or do you think your time is better spent behind a computer that whole time? I probably would have said time's better spent behind a computer. It's good just to pay the people, but again, given we didn't have any money to pay them, it ended up being that the best thing for the company was to have us in the out there in front of customers, talking to them, learning about what they like, what they didn't like. So that's when people ask me for advice at the early stages. That's usually one of the number one things I would say is get out there no matter how you can, and just get in front of a customer and talk to them, and then implement that feedback that night.
Yeah. I think the feedback loop and that cadence is really interesting. I think in the earlier days, the faster that you can have that communication loop and cadence to fix the product is so important. And then obviously as you like scale your team, your people, and you can start to actually hire the people that you need to do those things, like that you continue to have that cadence. Not only the cadence, I think, with like customers, but the team cadence as well. Cause I think it's always a journey of like learning what's working, if it's, if it's the product, if it's sales, if it's marketing. But in the earlier days, it definitely seems like you need a faster cadence when it comes
I
to
definitely agree with that.
learning.
I think you need a faster cadence, and I think it's easier to be faster because you have, less people that you're coordinating amongst.
Right.
You also have just less customers and less going on at the business, and less eyeballs on you and all that. So it's pretty easy to move very fast. If you release a bug when you have 1,000 customers, it's not as big of a deal as if when you have 1 million, obviously. So
Right.
I think some things change, but to your point, it's really important to figure out how can we keep the team very focused on collecting the feedback, implementing it very quickly, learning from it, and then continuing to iterate.
Now, what's that look like today with that? I mean, you guys, I think, raised just over $20 million, and you're added to your team significantly. What's that communication and cadence look like today?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, thrilled to be working with our set of investors. First Mark, Craft, Burst Capital, FJ Labs have all been fantastic, amongst a couple others that we have in the round. And we've built out the team. So we're about 15 people full time now. We'll probably be closer to 20 by the end of the summer. And a lot of that has been, across go to market, marketing, product engineering, kind of been evenly dispersed. A big part of what we do is continue to invest in being embedded within the community. So both our just larger community of users, our community of influencers and creators that use the platform, so that we can still collect a lot of that feedback right away. A lot of our users, whether they're power users or more casual users, have just the phone numbers of people on our team, and they're able to text, call, pretty much whenever they either see something that they think might be a bug or have an idea of a potential feature enhancement. I think that allows us to move pretty quickly. We still do operate fairly lean. And most of our hiring has come in the last couple weeks since closing the Series A back in February. So it's a bit recent. Obviously, like there's some growing pains when you're onboarding team members that might slow things down for a little bit. But ultimately, if it's a one step backwards for two plus steps forward, then we'll take it.
Yeah, yeah. Are you guys building remote, or you guys have everybody in the office, or what's that look like?
We're all in the office, so exciting update for us is that we've officially grown out of our first office here. So we have with people sitting at other people's desks, just based on who's here and who's traveling for work and whatnot. So we'll be moving offices pretty soon, but we're 4 days a week in the office, and then the fifth day is kind of an optional hybrid day. So we'll have some people come into the office because they feel they just work better out of the office, and or may want to meet with other team members. But people also have the option to work remote. And the goal of those Fridays is limited meetings. Let's make sure that we've been working on a bunch of things all week. Let's make sure we're buttoning them all up and continue to move forward.
Less teams seem to be all getting together like that, but I just think you can make it work either way, right? I think you can really make it work either way, and there's like pros and cons of each way of that, but having a mix of that I think works as well.
Yeah, definitely. And just from conversations I've had with other startup founders, whether they're in New York or just in general, it seems like a lot of people are choosing to build in person, and a lot of them are minimum 4 days. A couple friends have companies that are 5 days a week. Our investors they generally track their portfolio and who's in office and who's not. And it does seem there is the companies that are in person do seem to be performing a bit better. It seems. So we're excited about it. We think we move a lot faster in person, and it's I think good for the company culture. It's good for everyone to be hanging out, chatting with each
Right.
other, chatting across different teams. When else would someone on the engineering team talk to someone that's working on the marketing team, right? So, uh, you know, it's great at this stage of our company.
And I think that you have a benefit being in New York. Some of these bigger markets, you can find people, especially in the niche type of roles that you're probably looking for too, that have kind of been there and done it before. I think there's more of those people in those larger areas, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And, most of our team lives within 25 minutes of the office, so it's a pretty easy commute, not asking too much right now.
Yeah. Um, Looking back, over the period of like raising the money, what was that experience like for you? Because that was the first time you raised capital. Is that right?
That's true. Yeah. So fundraising was interesting. We spent 2.5 years trying very, very hard to raise money. And then it felt like within a week we had a couple of people really interested, and we actually ended up closing the deal on a Sunday. And with our initial investor was Jeff Fleur over at Kraft, and um, you know, we went through the first year of attempting the social calling concept. Wasn't a lot of interest there. I think we made a lot of mistakes as first time founders in that company, which might be a story for another time. And then once we made the pivot into what we're doing with the rent and marketplace, I think consumer marketplaces at the time might not have been the most popular investment choice. I think everyone realizes how amazing they can be once they get going, and once you start to see the network effects and all of that. But a lot of the feedback we received early on was, I'd love to see a year's worth of data. So our people that are coming on to try this out, actually interested in it? Do they actually have a good experience to the point where they want to come back and continue to spend money? Are you able to get more and more people on uploading their own items? What does that look like? And then I think people had a lot of questions about how we would handle some of the operational and logistical components of it. So we basically kept plugging away. I would say like my kind of tied with getting out there and talking to customers is, focusing on building. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time going to different events or trying to find, different networking opportunities to get in front of investors, and they just want to talk about the business a lot rather than build the business. And
Mm,
we just basically kept our heads down and worked hard to make every customer as happy as possible. And what it led to was just some really incredible retention and engagement metrics that got a lot of investors pretty excited. And what they say is true. Once you get like a few people interested, everyone kind of talks, and then you get a lot of people interested. So we were able to sign on with a couple of fantastic investors. So I mentioned Jeff Fleur over at Kraft, Rick Heitzman at First Mark, who actually ended up joining our board, and then Jeff Donaker and the team at Burst Capital as well, have been incredible the entire time. And then when it came time to raise the the Series A, we had been talking with Jeff, both Jeffs and Rick, and going through some of our metrics and talking about what it would look like to go out to the market. And I think they just got really excited about what we're building, and ended up kind of preempting us, saying pretty much a day before we were going to go out to the market, they kind of put a term sheet in front of us, and with terms that we were really excited about, that they were excited about. I think we were really complimented because especially Rick's on the board, Jeff's a board observer, and when you sit in a room with people and you talk about all the bad things that are going on at a company all year, and then they're still really excited about putting some more capital in. It's really a great sign for the business. So didn't end up really going out doing some big roadshow or big fundraising initiative. We brought on FJ Labs in the Series A as well, which really excited about working with Jeff Weinstein and Fabrice and team. Obviously, a ton of great marketplace experience and knowledge and connections coming from them. And then we brought on a few other investors that we actually haven't announced yet. But some pretty great connections and all that there. So very difficult for the first 2.5 years. And then, we just continued to focus on building a really great business. And that's what gets investors excited. We
right.
focused on unit economics. So we're not just giving away free rentals here. We're actually looking to run the business pretty sustainably. Rick calls them strong behavioral economics. So, are the people that are using the company actually people that are able to use the company, or the business? And, are there enough of those out there where we can turn this into something pretty big? And it turns out so.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say is like, there are some people that are just really good at raising capital. And I think sometimes that can really go against them. And the fact that this business that you're doing now would never have happened if you hit it on the first try, right? And that
Yeah.
first attempt that you're doing, if you were able to raise a lot of money, the business will look probably very different. You'd have probably had to maybe stay a little bit more towards the course that you started, or it might have been really hard to make that pivot. And I think you may not be where you're at. And I think sometimes people force the funding before it's time.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And yeah, I hope I've gotten a bit better at raising capital. Was definitely not good at the start, and that turned out to be a really good thing to your point. So wouldn't change how it all shook out. But yeah, I mean, our goal as a company is that it doesn't really matter how good we are at raising capital. The business is just good at raising capital, and I think it's really difficult to get those initial checks. So I think a lot of people, you really do have to be good at raising capital to get an initial check. But once you get some buy-in and then get to work with some of these really talented company builders, like we've been able to, it definitely provides a lot of clarity to the vision and the direction of the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Focus on building a business, and you don't have to worry about focusing on getting capital. It will come to you, right? It will come.
It will come, or hopefully you can just stop raising capital altogether.
Yeah. With some of the people that you mentioned that you have on your board or investors, what type of elements are you really gleaning from them that's like helping you guys right now?
Yeah, I think all over. I think we when we were looking for investors, we were really interested in people that had been former operators. And we had gotten that advice from a couple people, and it makes a lot of sense. And you couldn't speak higher of really focusing on that. We A lot of the time we spend in the board meetings isn't necessarily on the spreadsheets and things like that. At this stage it's about how are we putting together the team, and team construction, people management is something that can seem pretty easy if you just do it on a spreadsheet, but people that have actually done it realize and understand how hard it is. We talk about, just some of the ways that people think about the business and kind of the psychological aspects and elements of it, things that might not
Mm.
appear in the data, or might appear a bit counterintuitive to do that might make sense. We talk about in terms of product roadmap, like what are the things that really were unlocks for StubHub in Jeff's case, or Airbnb, Pinterest, or some of the other companies that Rick was involved in. And all of that is just it's just really great experience to be able to tap into. So yeah, we're thrilled with that. They obviously, we will go through the numbers and talk about unit economics. I think they're really helpful
Right.
for benchmarking as well. Like, okay, where should we be at this stage? And then like where do we need to go in order to, receive either another capital injection, or potentially start generating a profit from the business.
Yeah. I think I mean, speak about operations. I love the operational side of business and like very deep within that. But I think the value of having investors that have operational experience is that they just kind of been there and done it. And especially the ones that have been there, done it, and then invested and seen other people and been part of that journey, I think is just, you can glean so much from that. And there's so many like unlocks you can do without having to fail. And there are all these, like, I kind of feel like there are all these little blueprints out there if you can talk to the right people, especially industry focused elements.
That's a Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff, and that kind of reminds me of a really great initial example from these guys in terms of the been there, done that. Is shortly after shortly after we had signed, kind of started working with this group, we had a down month. Kind of every month in the company's history, we had grown, and then we raised all this capital, and then we have a down month. And this was back in November of 2023. And so, Julia and I are kind of freaking out, like, whoa, like, we haven't had a down month. We bring in all this money, and then we have our first down month. Like, how is this possible? They're going to be pissed. And, we kind of go chat with them, tell them, hey, like, this happened. And they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of it's called a shoulder month, where there's a lot of seasonality in marketplaces, especially consumer marketplaces, and it does make sense. There's not a lot going on for rental use cases in the month of November, and just
Right.
kind of gave the advice of hey, don't focus on making the really bad months less bad. Focus on making the great months even better. And that's just incredibly helpful advice from people who had obviously experienced that before.
That resonates with me right now. I love that. That's really good advice.
Yeah,
That definitely
it's some
resonates with me right now. Yeah. Yeah.
life
A lot of
advice
people
too.
will hyper focus on the negative aspects versus hyper focus on, where you can really move the needle. And I think that's so true. I really like that. Yeah. Focus on making the better months better. I like that.
Yeah,
No, of course,
yeah.
you don't hide from the things that maybe aren't going wrong. And maybe not in your case, since it's more of a marketplace, but I also know many, many teams early stage when they're raising capital, they will have down months because of their focus on raising that capital.
Yeah,
Especially
no,
if
it's
you're
totally true. And I think the advice is like more so like, don't, if there's not a use case for your product, don't try and force one, because it might take more time to force it than just like taking a step back and figuring out, okay, what could we be doing in November that might be might allow us to flatten out the numbers or to potentially grow even more. And one of the things we did this previous November is we focused a bit more on the sales opportunity, or cleaning out your closet. So you are able to sell items on Pickle, and instead of just pushing, hey,
Mm,
rent, 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 since there's less kind of like rental use cases in November, we pushed a little bit more of, hey, by the way, you can list your things for sale, and people started to do that and would sell some items, and it all turned out well. So yeah, Jeff, he definitely clarified, it doesn't mean give up on the month. It just
right.
means kind of figure out different ways to do it, but don't go into like full blown panic just because you have one down month in a shoulder month.
Now that you guys grown a little bit and you're kind of starting to embark on probably having like more of a team of teams model versus one team, you can't gather around one pizza anymore. Like, how are you keeping the team focused now that it's becoming a kind of more of a team of teams?
Yeah, so we're right there in that kind of inflection point there, and really just because of some hiring over the past couple of weeks. So yeah, figuring all that out right now, and excited to read peak teams to continue to learn what we should be doing there. I think one of the things is just trying to make sure that expectations and goals and milestones are very clearly communicated, so that the whole team knows what they're working towards. I think it's something we can do a lot better, and especially as we are starting to more formally establish different teams, as opposed to like everyone just kind of helping out where they can. It's one of the things that we're really keying in on over the next couple weeks.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. I love to ask this question, and I don't, you can take it a couple different ways, but like looking at the marketplace and kind of going through this up to the stage that you're at right now, like what do you think is not talked about enough that you think is important for CEO, founder, their team?
The communicating and kind of establishing what are the 5 to 8 KPIs, where if we're hitting those at the end of the quarter, we'll have said, we just crushed it this quarter. And making sure that each of those KPIs has a very clear owner, who their sole responsibility is to make sure that you hit that number, and that really, and you basically say, we'll do anything we can to help you have, obviously all these
Right.
resources, and can establish a team, things like that. But we have to be hitting this number. And that just really allows us to have both clarity and focus on what we're actually doing and what the intended outcome is, as opposed to, just trying to think through, hey, like what could be cool to do. Right
Yeah.
now, it's what will actually move this number. And it's one of the things that we're starting to do this quarter, and we'll really be focusing on, and doing a lot of preparation for in Q3.
Yeah, I have teams that I've started working with that are earlier stage than you guys or much later stage than you guys, and it's always interesting to me to like kind of understand where they sit from a what are your most important KPIs, or let's just call them metrics because some are not KPIs, like they're not leading indicators. But a lot of teams will shy away from doing that because they're afraid to miss those numbers and demotivate the team. And one of the things that
Mm.
I really like to talk about is like, let's just choose a few things to measure and let's throw that number out. We may not know what number we're going to hit, but let's at least start tracking towards some sort of number. If we hit it, great. If we don't hit it, we're going to learn from it. But what a lot of teams do is they'll shy away from even doing that because they don't want to look bad or they don't want to demotivate the team. And I think if you can set these numbers up, these metrics or KPIs, and say, hey, we're doing this to understand the business, so we all can be successful. I think it's a lot easier to set that up and for teams to kind of run with it. But the reality is, if you don't throw some numbers out there, you don't track them, and if you don't track
Yeah.
them, then you never know. And I think the other piece that relates to this too is that there's KPIs, things, the numbers that we want to hit, right? But then there's what I like to use is OKRs, and I like to think of the OKRs as what do we actually need to do to actually build capabilities in the organization to keep on moving those numbers higher and higher, right? Like
Mhm.
it's hiring people, building different processes, developing the product. Like, those are all OKRs. Like, what do we need to do and how are we going to do it? Who's going to own that? When's it going to get done by? The OKRs, I think, really build capabilities to help you hit those KPIs. And I think some teams kind of miss that, where they'll just jump on the KPIs, or they'll think their OKRs are KPIs. And I think they're
Yeah.
two separate things.
Yeah, I agree. Two separate things, and I think it is a tough transition to really understand. Because you hear, oh, early stage startup, you got to be moving fast, you have to be dynamic, but that doesn't mean you can't plan. And
Right.
I think we kind of were a bit late on that. We wanted to stick more to the, okay, like we'll figure out whatever like the most pressing things are for the next couple of weeks. That's what we're going to be working on, and as long as you can still pick up new things that come up,
Yeah.
then that's great. But I fully agree. Kind of planning out and giving the clarity of this is what we're really working towards. If anything changes, like we'll figure it out and discuss it as a team. But the planning aspect of it, hard to know when to start doing that, and how many team members or whatever the indicator is. But
Yeah.
it's something that some people probably start too early and some people probably start, well, way too late.
Yeah, I think it's just really stage appropriate. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of missed and it's hard to write about is, Measure What Matters is a great book on OKRs, but it doesn't really talk about venture back companies specifically. And it doesn't talk about like the stages. And it sells OKRs great. And I think OKRs are good if you know some of the tweaks to make them work right. But it's really about how does it work at different stages of the company in different companies. And I think that would be more of a manual to write than a book. And I think Measure What Matters really sold the idea of using OKRs, which I love, but it didn't really tell you like how to use them and how it really works and how to measure them and how to like stay on top of them. And it's okay to change your key results from time to time, as long as the whole team's, so those aspects, I think it's, you start simple and then you kind of grow into it from a stage standpoint. And I think you're right. I think some teams do it way too late. I think some teams do too heavy of a process too early. And it's really, it's that focus, having the ability to focus, but be flexible. I think is trying to find that thread the needle between focus of the team, but keeping it flexible, because things are going to change. And I think they're always going to change, but especially at the earlier stage, they're going to change faster, kind of going back to our earlier conversation of kind of a faster cadence versus a slower cadence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some people probably over playbook a bit. I'm not a huge fan of just kind of taking in playbooks that have worked for other teams because they're probably not going to be able to be as plug and play and work for your team. I think
Right.
taking bits and pieces of those and patching them together, figuring out how they work for your team, but then iterating upon it as you figure out, this is really good, this is really bad. We don't like to be overly prescriptive with what we do, but it requires a lot of communication to make sure that we're kind of all aligned on what the priorities are.
Yeah. And I think that's not uncommon for teams like yours that are doing something that's never been done before. Right? There's
Yeah, yeah,
there's no blueprint for Pickle. If there was,
yeah,
you probably wouldn't have got capital, right?
yeah.
If there's like 15 other people doing that, right? So I think
Mhm.
that's very common in your situation. Well, all right. So
Yeah,
I have one last question for you. I appreciate your time. This has been an awesome conversation. I could talk to you
yeah.
all afternoon. So this is the final question, more of a scenario. I always call this the most important question you've ever been asked. So here's the scenario: you're trapped on a desert island the rest of your life. You have plenty of food, water, beverages, healthcare. You got everything that you possibly could need, but you're going to be on this desert island the rest of your life. But there's one thing that you don't have, and that's entertainment. There's no entertainment on this island. But luckily for you, Brian, a old 80s boombox drifts ashore with unlimited batteries. But you can only bring one album to listen to the rest of your life. What are you going to bring?
Let's say maybe right now my fiance and I are going to see Coldplay in a few weeks. So maybe that. So I'm geared up and ready to go for that concert. But yeah, probably I'll go with that Coldplay.
Coldplay is a great answer. Their new album's awesome. I
Yeah,
love their new
yeah,
album.
it's great.
I've always
Yeah,
wanted
totally.
to get into Coldplay, and it was just kind of took me a while. I kept on thinking they sounded like U2, for so long. And then it was literally this last album. One of the songs on this last album, they did a memorial for, I forgot the actor's name. And it's just an incredible song. And I listened to that song probably like 500 times. And now I'm a Coldplay fan. And now I can go back and start like listening to their older stuff, and they have such a rich like album history.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So.
I got more into it once we booked the concert tickets, and yeah, they're great.
Well, I'm sure that's gonna be an awesome concert. So, well,
Yeah.
cool, man. Thanks for joining me on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This has been awesome. Yeah, really excited about it, and can't wait to hear the episode.